Hey modelers, welcome to this first episode of the Model Philosopher podcast. I'm Chris, and many of you may know me from my other podcast, the Sprue Cutters Union, or from my business Inside the Armour, now ITA3. A few of you may know me from the Model Philosopher blog. The blog and this podcast are all about the more philosophical side of modelling. Not so much the how-to of making scale models, but more the why. And with that, questions of why we do it, what we want to say with it, and how we go about saying it. It's not for everyone. I've already been accused of being pretentious for even trying to address these things, but I hope a few modelers out there will get something from it. The blog is composed of long-form essays, but I recently started interviewing modelers around single subjects. Rather than the freewheeling general interviews common to modelling podcasts like the SCU, these are themed discussions with people I feel have a particular insight into the subject at hand. So here we are with the first interview on the subject, Calvin Tan, and modelling and art. I first became aware of Calvin many years ago via the old military modelling forum. I was blown away by Calvin's mastery of the craft of figure painting, but also by the atmosphere and pathos of his work. Far more emotive than general figure painting, particularly the kind of figure painting other modellers in my own chosen genre of armour were, and indeed still are, doing. As I've come to learn more about the craft of modelling, I've seen how Bill Horan, Shep Payton and others have influenced Calvin's work, and that's something he gets to in the interview. But he's also maintained his own distinct and powerful voice in his own work. I've had the opportunity to interview Calvin before on the Sprue Cutters Union, and I've come to know him a little more over the years, and his deep understanding of and enthusiasm for the craft of modelling and art has been a joy to share. Calvin is also an art educator at DigiPen Institute of Technology, Singapore. With his education background and his modelling pedigree, he was an ideal person to discuss this with. Let's hear from Calvin now. I mean, if we're going to talk about art and modelling, we need to establish the definition of art first. What do we mean by art?
Exactly. So I think for me, again, this is my take. I would consider like art is something, and again, it's a very simplistic take. You see, it basically defines any work of expression that evokes sentiment and elevates our human experience. I think that's the main thing. So basically, right, what it is that when we talk about art, right, there's always another thing that we always talk about because it comes together with craft.
Yeah.
Because arts and craft, right, it always comes together. So craft and these two terms are usually connected, because art has a craft, but craft doesn't necessarily translates to art.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a good example. When I read the book Art and Fear, it did say, for example, let's say if you look at a violin, right, it's been created by an old master, let's say, for example, right, takes many years of apprenticeship to shape the violin until it reaches its final state. But the tragedy of this, and I do say it's a tragedy, but despite the numerous years and expertise to craft the violin, most people won't call that violin a sculpture or piece of art. But however, when a musician picks it up and maybe he plays a tune, and suddenly that becomes art. The tune becomes the art. And what you look at a violin, although it requires years and years of mastery to create the instrument, it does not enjoy that level of prestige. So, and I say that when it comes to modeling, it also the same could be said, because models have always been sort of a representation. It's always seen as a tool of learning. People don't see it as a sculptural piece at all. So if you sort of so it goes back to Marcel Duchamp when he placed the fountain. Remember the famous fountain?
The urinal.
So what is this now? Is this a urinal or is this a sculpture, right? So it starts, and questions like this starts to arise, and this has been, this has always been provoked. I mean, hundreds of years ago, right? And in terms of when you go into the gallery, when you look at the urinal, is it now a piece of sculpture, or is this an instrument? Or you tend,
I remember when I was at art college, the debate is ceramics art, because you make a pot, it's a craft. to be able to throw a
Correct.
pot or to be able to hand form a pot or
Yep.
ceramic or what have you. And it seems like that's one that was always very much people debated whether it was an art or a craft. And there's a great deal of skill that goes into making it. And I think, like the
Yes.
violin, it really depends how it's made and the intent, because in recent years in this country, in the UK, Grayson Perry's become very famous as an artist, and he's
Hmm.
made mainly ceramics. But it's what they were decorated with, how they were decorated, and how he made them that made them art. And I think the same with the violin, because people would argue that a Stradivarius is a a work of art.
Yes.
But it's interesting because of what you said about when it's played. I think some people could appreciate looking at it that it's a work of art, but most people would only be really able to appreciate it by the quality of its tone when it's played.
Yes.
Because a lot of violins have been made throughout history, and a lot of
Yes.
them are
Correct.
quite basic violins that look to the
Yes.
untrained eye like any other violin, but there's a
Exactly.
huge difference in quality between one and the other.
Exactly. Exactly. And this, I would say that it's a bit within it's within that very exclusive group of people who perhaps within the field or within the community of the artisans, they may consider a very well made violin a work of art.
Mm.
Because again, I mean, they firstly, as far as the artisans are concerned, they appreciate the labor, the discipline it goes in creating something. And I think what the takeaway, if let's say a violin is to be regarded as a work of art, the takeaway would be the emotional connection the viewer has with the object.
Yeah.
So if and I think that is something that they don't that, at the heart of it, right? I would say that is what art has. It has, people will say that a piece of work will have a soul, and but the soul is actually assigned by the viewer, whether or not they're able to recognize and appreciate and see. You know, the able to see the invisible. You know, so it's almost very Zen, like the Japanese, right? They believe every object has a soul. Be able to see it, able to appreciate it. So in a sense, they are a bit more sensitive and more in tune with certain objects, inanimate objects.
I think you say it's assigned by the viewer, and it is, because if it doesn't affect the viewer, I don't think it's art. If it doesn't, I think it can affect you intellectually as well as emotionally, or instead of emotionally,
Correct.
one or the other. But I think it's a conversation, because it has to be, the art exists between the artist and the viewer, if you see what I mean, between
Yes.
the intent
Correct.
and the reception of the intent.
Exactly.
And the craft comes in with how well that intent and effect is communicated, how
Yes.
effective it is in communicating that to the viewer.
Correct.
So, I mean, I've got the feeling someone's going to be reading this blog thinking this is an art blog or a modeling blog. So, I mean,
But I think the concepts I can see is actually very universal.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I think when people when people, I would say that I would say at the end of the day, there's also what do you call that, cognitive biases, when people judge things or basically view objects. You know, there's a cognitive bias.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you are into like Spitfires, right? It's
Mhm.
like, oh, I know every model, and the history of this. And when you see a particularly well-made model represented in its full glory and accurately, what do you call that, represented, I mean, you finally feel like, your heart skipping a beat and say, wow, this is so well done. And suddenly it doesn't see it, you will look past the model as a piece of plastic and metal and what else there's on the model, and see it as, an object with a soul
Mhm.
and something to tell. So at that stage, at that point, you can see that that object has transcended to just being a model, to something of an artwork, an art piece. And that's where you will start to you start to be drawn into it, and start to look at it more, and immerse yourself in that model.
Something that people often talk about when this debate comes up of is modeling art is that it's creative. Do you think making a
Yes.
model kit is inherently a creative act?
I would say creativity. It is. I mean, creativity is universal. Create. Human beings are creative by nature. I mean, it is hardwired into our brains in order for us to survive, right? Figuring things and creativity. I would say, is often conflated with artistry.
Mm.
Well, in actual fact, it's actually more linked to problem solving. So it's not so much about creating something new or refreshing. It sometimes is about solving problems. Like, oh, for example, if your decals are damaged, how do you go about solving it? Is there a substitute? Is there an alternative? Things like this, and you can see creativity being utilized and being. I mean, creatively being what do you call that? Leveraged, right, to solve problems. So, for example, it's like I don't want to build so many tracks, right? So, what can I do to sort of get around it? Some modelers, they tend to take shortcuts, but you can also see it from on the flip side. You can see it as like taking a shortcut could be something very creative, so long as they don't get caught,
Yeah.
right? So it's always about trying to get away with murder. That's what some people are trying to do to sort of speed up the process. So I would say that building a model is inherently a creative act. But having said that, however, if like building 1,000 models of the same, like say you're painting an army for wargaming, now I don't think there's much creativity in that anymore. It becomes labor. If you become a line production, you become a line production worker, and it does not engage your creative faculties at all, and therefore it becomes a menial chore, and that's what I see.
I think
So yeah.
sometimes I felt like that when I'm building a kit which doesn't require any or very little problem solving other than the usual basic modeling skills,
Yes, correct.
filling, sanding, so on.
Yep.
And you can kind of feel like, am I paying to work on a assembly line?
Yes,
Am I paying someone
I know.
in order to be able to
Feels like
assemble
a
something?
sweatshop endeavor.
Do you think there's any creativity in that?
I don't think so, because it does not give you. Okay, it's I mean I would say that with every model the experience should be different.
Mm.
Otherwise, what's the point of doing it? Because it's like watching a new movie, right? You don't want to watch the same movie again and again and again and again, unless there's something new to discover. Then yes, then it's great. Oh, I didn't notice this. I didn't notice this. But the thing is that if it gets too repetitive and gets too mundane and boring, that's where you need to know that it's time to move on, right? You know.
Yeah, why do it?
So yeah, why do it exactly? So yeah, I think at the end of the day, we humans want to be challenged, and I
Mm.
think a lot of modelers, they want to be challenged, in terms of they challenge themselves or attempting a new sort of project or mastering a technique, for example, right, like figure painting or maybe painting camouflage. I think that's something that's refreshing, and I think that is something that I think there's something that unique that this hobby offers. The sort of challenges, right?
Mm.
So, as I said, creativity is something that I would say that it. I mean, being able to engage in a creative act, right? Being able to engage in a creative act helps to basically enrich your life in that sense, because you often you will come up a bit wiser, better, and happier.
Mm.
From actually going through that experience.
You said something interesting earlier, though, that creativity is not the same as artistry.
Yes. I would say creativity is definitely it's a broader term.
Mm. So if creativity is problem solving, what is artistry?
So artistry that you do require creativity
Mm.
to do art, but so you also need creativity to be a successful engineer as well, in any other fields, right? So it's creativity is it's present in everything in what we do. To be a chef, and I mean to be a sportsman or whatever, it is there. You need to find innovative ways to solve problems. So artistry, I would say, in a sense, like artists, is how do we use the resources that is at our disposal, our talents, our abilities to create, I would say, enriching human experiences, right, for others. So it's like, if you have a good voice, you sing a very nice tune, you brighten up somebody's day, right? And that is what essentially what art essentially does, right? I mean, the good ones are thinking in terms of, oh, how can I make a difference, right, in this world, right? It may, and the things that how do I enrich the lives of others in that sense. I think that's one of the purposes, and but there are some people who sort of hijack this and do it for their own ego and selfish intentions, just to but again, we have to acknowledge these are very different people. They have been brought up very differently. It's part of their innate personalities. I mean, that's how I see. So in a sense, like in terms of art, I think generally, it should serve the purpose of actually bringing people together, and I would say that it should possess these sort of virtues in that sense. It should uplift and enrich the lives of others. So every time when I sort of paint a figure, or I do or create a piece, I will always think is that, oh, I mean, how do I accurately represent it, and such that people can learn from this, not just in terms of the technique, but how do I bring the story out using this medium of modeling, and using it as a medium to tell a story. It can all basically to express my inspiration in that sense.
Do you think it's the story that creates the emotional connection?
I would say it is the response of the artist, because every artist is like a vessel. You need to be inspired, and once you're inspired, you have this energy, this excitement, this flame that's in it. And the question is now, how do I bottle this up and ship it to the rest of the world? And that's where art comes in, right? You channel this inspiration outwards in through your art. So be it poetry, music, right, and even modeling as well, right? And that's how it is. So I would say that as an artist, the main thing is to always be open, and always sort of learn what's around you, absorb what's around you, take it in, and through and that's where the craftsmanship comes in. That's the where people, that's where you are using modeling as a language, rather than just focusing on this technique, producing very decorative pieces, and that's where the work becomes expressive.
Do you think we focus too much on the craft side as modelers?
Yes, I would say so. So there is a difference in terms of arts and crafts. Now, the thing about craft is that it is possible to attain perfection with craft. And that's the difference between art and craft, because art itself is not exactly very perfect. It may be rough around the edges, but the thing is that you get the sense of what the soul of this object is supposed to represent. There is a certain quality, semi almost almost undescribable, but there is a certain quality about it, and it's not perfect. Now with craft, it's very different, because for longest time, scratch building, was as a craft, it's all about precision. And now with 3D printing, there's no really need to bust up any styrene, because whatever you're going to do is only going to be 99.9%. It won't be 100%, as accurate as what a machine can print. So in a sense, that's where, in terms of craftsmanship, the age of perfection has arrived through the 3D modeling. It's possible to scan an actual object and shrink it down to the exact size and print it up with precision. So as far as art is concerned, it requires the human intervention to come in and discern, what is relevant and what's irrelevant. And that is where the human touch comes in. That's where your sensibilities as an artist, as a person, comes in. You will decide whether or not what to include or what to take away, and such that your audience will be able to grasp what you're trying to communicate.
I think it's fair to say we're on the same page that modeling is, generally speaking, a craft, but it can be art, or you can make art with models.
Yes. I would say, if you look at this, right, you can categorically place models, scale models, as sculpture, right? So the question is like, it's like Marcel Duchamp's, right, fountain or urinal. So it depends on how you want to sort of, how do you take it, where how are you going to use this medium and bring it to the next level? Is there so, for example, um, when you start to when you start to represent certain objects in a different scale, people will have a different feel with that particular object. So if you look at pop art like Klaus Oldenburg, he takes like a clothes peg and blows it up to, like, gigantic. It's like
Mm.
1,000 its size, 1,000 times larger than its original size, and suddenly becomes a sculpture. But you look at it, in terms of the shape, it is a clothes peg. But suddenly, when you start to change the scale altogether, it becomes a sculpture. The aesthetics and all this. And you can suddenly look at the humble clothes peg and think that, oh, I never thought that there's such elegance and beauty in this shape and this form. And this shape is, and to be honest with you, any efficient objects that's built from function is actually very beautiful, because it does serve the function, and there's a certain geometry that governs its creation. And in that sense, that respect for geometry and nature gives it that inherent beauty. And that's what I feel. There's a reason as well. If you look at the Spitfire, it looks so sexy. It's because, it's not done. The artist did not create that instrument. All right, is actually created by engineers and designers who respected basically laws of aerodynamics to create and fashion that particular warplane. You know, and with that, right, you can see the aesthetics comes with it. And it seems that the aesthetics was like, oh, it came together because we did the math and the physics, and therefore, that's why, it shapes like this, and it functions very well. So any object of beauty, I feel, has to represent certain truth and uphold certain ideals. And I think that's what constitutes as beauty.
Do you think when something is removed from its function by changing its scale, that allows us to appreciate the aesthetic? Because we see scale in relation to ourselves. So the clothes
Correct.
peg, once it stops being something you could literally peg clothes with and becomes a
Correct. Yes.
monumental object,
Correct.
changing its scale removes its function and allows you to appreciate the aesthetics.
In a sense, it does, because you start to, you will not think of this anymore as a functional item,
Mm.
and you will start to look at it as a shape in terms of its and you will appreciate it at an aesthetic level. And I think that's what it does.
Do you think with models then it's kind of a fallacy to treat models as a real object at a distance when we're working on them, if you see what I mean?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, it all depends whether or not. Okay, for example, if you're going to buy a model, and you're going to build, like, say, a 148 scale
Mm.
plane, it depends on your intention. You can just want to build it up and blow it up with firecrackers, or you're going to use it as a token for wargaming, or you're going to tell myself, this is a small representation of history, and the thing is that, or you want to do it as a tribute to perhaps a Battle of Britain veteran who has flown in this particular plane, and you want to sort of, you want to capture the whole story, the period, everything in that piece. So the thing is that how well the model is going to eventually look will largely hinges on the creator, the modeler, what he hopes to achieve with by building the model. Because the thing is that we are going to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort, and to learn certain skills to sort of, to build a particular model. And if you want it to be as realistic as possible, as convincing as possible, then it requires a longer journey. And the thing is that if your intentions are to create, let's say, a realistic, or not necessarily an accurate and realistic model, then you will be willing to do this, make the sacrifice. You know, so it all depends on the intent of the modeler. So, for example, like Merkle Braille, right? He's actually a historian who models. I would never consider Merkle Braille as a modeler. He's more like he's a historian who models. So he loves to see things. He loves to see the truth. And his pet subject is like, for example, Hungary 1944 to 45. He likes that, that all the models represented during the period to be as accurate as possible. So in a sense, he serves almost like a custodian, a gatekeeper, to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible, because he has interviewed a lot of veterans, and I believe that he has a lot of stories, and he's able to sort of channel all these stories into his work, and that's what he wants to sort of represent, you know. So he gets pretty annoyed, and I can understand why when if they are not accurately or properly represented, he gets pretty annoyed with that, because the thing is that he has all these references. You all you need to do is just ask. I gladly will share this all with you. I just want to see the truth being represented in the models as well. And I think a lot of people treat this more like a recreation, as a hobby. Say, oh, take it easy, man, I'm just gluing pieces of plastic together, making it look cool. you know but I think if you are a historian, I think you find that this is it's a bit of a travesty. When you sort of distort historical fact, and turn it into some Hollywood, what do you call that, action flick.
A low budget one without the accuracy.
Yeah, low budget B grade movie, right? Right, correct. Yeah.
But if you want to tell the truth, do you think sometimes the art comes in with exaggerating certain aspects or changing the exact representational side of it to heighten the emotion of it in some way?
Okay, so I think that is okay. So the thing is that when it comes to that in this case, right, when we start to move into painting technique, some of the painting techniques especially, they tend to go over the top, because it's all about creating the strongest visual appeal. And as a result, what happens is that it loses its what do you call that, or its original intent. The Panther, right? Okay, Panther 1944 Hungary, the Panther may not look like, it may not represent the period anymore if you start to use a different palette of colors. It's like, oh, this looks cool, I'll just do it because it looks cool, and the markings are just an afterthought. and suddenly you feel that it's well built, but it does not really convey the mood of that particular time. And I think that I think that an artist, right, you need to understand your subject matter. And that's where the research comes in. And I think a lot of people, especially the younger modelers, they are seduced by the look, the aesthetics of the model, but they failed to consider, the historical context behind that. And I think, in a sense, right, I think what a lot of the older generation of modelers who are more historically in tune, they get very annoyed because they look at the skill and the ability. It's like, wow, with this ability, I would have done it differently. And it's like you can sense that. I think at the end of the day, right, it depends, because for me, my approach has always been to read up a bit about the subject before I actually embark on the subject itself. And I think you can see this with Mike Blank and Bill Horan, and as well as Shad Payne. They are if you speak to them, if you interact with them, they are all historians. They were able to tell you, everything about the subject that they are modeling. And I think that is what gives depth to the models. And you can see there's a very big difference between a very skilled, Russian painter who's fantasy / historical painter who's able to paint very well. And if you compare the work together with what Bill Horan has, or Mike Blank has, with the very skilled painter who only paints, it's like a gun for hire, you can see there is something missing. It's something missing. So in a sense, it's like, if you take ramen and you like cook it and you squeeze tomato ketchup over it, you can't really call it, bolognese, right? And some people are, it's like, okay, it looks, I mean, if you take an Instagram photo, it looks the same, but it's not going to be the same,
I'm thinking
Yeah.
of Mirko's work though, and Roger Hertman's, and maybe Volker Benbenek as well a bit.
Yes.
They're quite a desaturated palette, and there's quite dark in a lot of areas.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that was photorealistic, but it adds a mood which is sympathetic to the
Yes.
story they're telling. So that's what
Yes.
I'm talking maybe about, how you heighten something in order to tell the truth, because
Yes.
they add that sort of depressive quality
I
to
would say
what they're
the
doing.
heighten means, but also at the same time, it should not distort.
Yeah.
That's the thing that a lot of people are doing. They're using all these techniques, and invariably it will create a much more visually appealing work, but you get the sense that it's distorted. It doesn't really convey that the pathos of the particular period. For example.
Maybe it's more like craft then, because it's not done in
Correct.
service to the message, in service to what you're
Exactly.
trying to communicate.
Exactly. And you can see that it's pretty, and you can see this happening in the fantasy realm, where you're looking at every piece that you look on in the competition tables for the fantasy category, you will see every piece is very bright. It's out there to catch your eye, and it's very eye catching. It's very decorative. It's very eye catching. It's aesthetically, it's like it's like a table of desserts, right? And that's what I mean. I'm not a fantasy painter, but that's what I sense. I do love desserts, but I look at it, it's all sweet, it's nice, it's awesome. You know.
I've seen them use it though I mean, they use incredibly high contrasts, whether it's light and shade or colors or what have you. It's always,
Yes.
it's like, you get your stereo and you turn everything, all the faders up to the max, basically.
Exactly.
But I have seen
Exactly.
it done really well. I've seen at World Model Expo, I think it was, there was an ogre with a fairy on his finger, a tiny little fairy on his finger, and
Yep.
he's looking at her, but all the light was focused between his eyes and nose and her
Yeah.
body, so that it pulls the
Correct.
focus to the place and created that emotional sort of joy moment which he's supposed to be feeling, and so on. So it can be
Correct.
used well, but yeah.
Yes. And it does require someone with the sensibility as well as the level of craftsmanship
Mm.
to be able to, it takes years of experience to discern what is necessary and what's not necessary to include in the work.
I think as well, for some people, they're innately good. I don't know if it's emotional intelligence which allows them to do it, but some people are very good at.
They are more sensitive vessels,
Mm.
and as I said, as artists, we are like vessels. We take in from we sort of take in with all the experiences that we have. We bring them together, we coalesce them, and then we sort of channel it into the artwork, and that's what it is. And everybody has a different take. If everybody has a unique take on life, everybody has a very unique take on a particular story, and everybody will have their own way of trying to tell the story in their own style, so to speak.
Do you
So yeah.
do you think, as modelers, we should be trying to put more art into our models?
I would say it is used if the purpose. Okay, again, it depends on the approach.
Mm.
So I wouldn't say it's modelers, but I'm saying that we should be sort of recommending that there are many approaches. If you get tired of trying to glue plastics together, you can take it up to a new level and turn it into a work of expression. Because for most people, this is seen as hobby craft, right? It's a hobby craft, and I just want to come in and I just want to just open the cap of thinner or cement, and and stick pieces of plastic together and build a scene. For them, it's pretty. It can be as simple as that. But there are some who are a bit more, I would say they are more knowledgeable. They read a lot, they get inspired by the stories, and they say, "Oh, now I want to recreate this moment. I'm going to do this, 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 this," and they have a clear vision of what the model is going to be. There are some people who just enjoy the process. I just want to just stick pieces of plastic together, and that's it, and they're happy doing it. Sometimes you go to clubs, and then you see some people say, I'm happy with what and the things that I don't really tell them on how to paint.
Mm.
If they're happy with it, if they're happy with the results, that's great, man. you know
I
that's
think
that's
90% of modelers, that's what they want to do. And I think, in a sense,
Exactly.
that if we talk about modelling as a hobby and call it one thing, which I don't think you can, but anyway,
Yep.
then that is it, because that's what the majority of
Yes.
people want to do. So I think,
Exactly.
I mean, I asked whether you think we should, but I don't think we should be telling people to put more art into their modelling, because modelling isn't really about that. But if you want to make art with models, you can.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's essentially it's a medium, so it depends on what hat they choose to wear.
Mm.
You know, if you just want to be a craftsman, you put on the craftsman hat and you just focus on the craft. You know, and just make sure everything is precise, and then send it to the IPMS show, and you get audited. And if you have the least mistakes, you get an award, right?
Or maybe not show it to
And
anyone, just for the joy of
yeah,
doing it.
exactly. Correct. You don't even need to show anyone because it's a
Mm.
hobby, right? You can just build it together, put it in a Tupperware, and then put it into your closet, and then start a new piece. I do know a lot of modelers like that. They don't show the work, right? They don't show the work. It is for their own personal pursuit and
Mm.
mental well being that they start to build this. But there are artists who want to sort of show, and they feel that perhaps, I mean, like I said, they feel that the work can make a difference, and they want to show it, and they want to help, they want to be part of a bigger conversation, so to speak, in terms of, or want to be part of the bigger community, and take this art form and take this hobby and bring it up to a level of an art form.
Who do you think's doing that?
I would say, okay, so I would say that it depends on the different genres.
Mm.
So if you look at it like Jean Bernard Andre,
Mm.
he's actually more of those sort of fine arts, because he talks about, I mean, the subject matters that he devils with, but it's more soulful, it's more emotional, and you can see it's a, he adopts a surreal approach in his work. So in that sense, in terms of that genre, I would say he's particularly very successful. Then if you're looking at traditional, like for example Bill Horan, Mike
Mm.
Blank, these guys are the more traditional artists in that sense. So they sort of they sort of capture the drama and the human, what do you call that, emotions, right? During the those the of those the Victorian or the American Civil War, the periods. So they are particularly successful in this. Moran is more of a playful. Moran Van Hills, he tends to be a bit more playful. He dabbles in everything, from doing a
Mm.
Picasso's, doing Picasso's Guernica, and you can see he's very inspired by Marcel Duchamp. Right, so it's all about redefining this. So that conversation, I think Moran has started out many many years ago, back in the mid 2000s. He's been doing this, always trying to challenge, existing status quos, right? Challenging taboos, right? So that's one way of looking at it. So you can't really call it fantasy, but I think and I think his work does provoke a lot of thought and thinking,
Yeah.
you know. So I think that is something that is, I would say, or say, what is one of the very defining qualities in which a lot of the artists that a lot of modelers who produce miniature art have in common. You know, their works themselves inspires not just emotional response, but also inspires conversations. It becomes what do you call that, a what do you call it, I would say a centerpiece
Mm.
for to promote another conversation, right? So it's like, I would say, yeah, that's how I would say that people will be talking about it, and you'll be using this as a segue to discuss something even broader, for example, right?
Doesn't need to be art to be, people like to call their modeling art. They don't need to use that word to justify what they're doing.
I No, it does. I don't think you need to. I mean, I think for us, I mean, it depends on whether or not are you doing this professionally as an artist,
Mm.
and then that, and because it's going to be very different if you're pursuing this as a hobby. Because if you're doing it as a hobby, then as long as I'm happy creating something, people enjoy it, I'm pretty happy about it. And the thing is that about art is that it needs to have an audience, and ultimately, once the work goes into public domain, it's no longer yours.
Yeah.
It's going to be seen through the lens of others, and they're going to have their opinions about it. Some may love it, some may hate it, but eventually, right, it's still the work. So unless you have a unless you have unless the artist, the creator, has a specific intent for the work, and that's where criticism and critique comes in to sort of perhaps um, helps you suss out any blind spots that you may have overlooked. I think critique is also very important as well, because some people may critique this based on the historical context. Some people may even critique it based on their own personal experiences, right? So if you have just for example, I can understand why the Nazi symbol, the swastika, is particularly offensive to some people, because they have lived through certain what do you call, there are certain memories, bad memories, horrific memories connected with that particular symbol, and therefore it conjures up a lot of sentiment as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that people need to be happy with the fact that a hobby is a really valid pursuit, and just to
Yes.
and to not need it to be anything else.
Yes.
It can,
Yeah.
like you said, it could be creative as well. So
Yes.
they're doing something which is has great value to them and to others, even if they if they
Yeah.
do choose to show it, or if they don't choose to show it. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, if art's a conversation, then which I think it is, between the artist and the viewer, then the artist has to listen as well as speak. So when the
Exactly.
critique comes back, they have to take on board that if people don't get it, or something isn't right about it, or they're getting something negative, then it's
Yes.
possibly a fault in how they've communicated what they're trying to say.
I think yes. I think a lot of people. The thing is about this is that a lot of people, I mean, on the surface, they may seem that they are asking for feedback, but in actual fact, their intent is to, fish. They are fishing for praise. Basically, they're fishing for compliments. Actually, yeah. So generally, for me, way I look at it is that I always treat critique as a way to sort of learn from mistakes, because I do not know everything, and sometimes I think we also have to defend the decisions that we have made with regards to the style we have adopted to represent our subject matter, right? Whether or not to use post shading, modulation, or is it too much to put the chips too much, so on and so forth. I think we need to sort of defend it, and it depends on in terms of what you want to convey. And as well as colors as well, when do we use a highly saturated color, and when do we use a very desaturated palette, for example, right? And I think again, it's all about the individual's what do you call that, take. It all boils down to the individual's take about it. And I think what we want to do is we want to promote a very safe environment whereby nobody's wrong, but nobody's totally right either.
Yeah.
Right? But we want to make sure that we have this exchange. Some disagreement. I mean, it's okay to have disagreements, but I think at the end of the day, as long as we are able to respect each other's positions, I think that's the most important thing. And I think it takes a lot of maturity for a community to sort of adopt these practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I'm not sure I agree with Calvin 100%. I think if you want to make art, there is room in modelling to deviate from complete historical accuracy and realism if it helps you to communicate a message of a wider truth, maybe about the human condition or war in a wider historical context than the single one depicted in the scene. I also think art can have purposes other than the elevation of human experience in a positive way. It can hold a mirror to the darker aspects of the world too, or make us question our own beliefs even in uncomfortable ways. But overall, I think I agree with him much more than I disagree. And if this show and blog has a purpose, it's to make a conversation and to make us all think. I think Calvin always delivers in spades in that regard, and it's just a joy to talk to him about subjects like this. It's always a stimulating and deeply engaging conversation. Don't forget you can also find a transcript of this interview at modelphilosopher.com, along with a lot of other content. Before I go, I'd like to ask for your help. Hosting this podcast comes at some cost, so if you can, please throw £1 or $1 my way at patreon.com/themodelphilosopher. If you enjoy this pod, Please do recommend it to others and leave a review on your podcast app of choice. Reviews help others to find the show. You can contact me at info@insidethearmour.com with any feedback about the show or suggestions for future topics, and I do look forward to hearing from you. Take care, thank you for listening, and catch you next time on The Model Philosopher.